The smoke was still in my hair when I walked into the church. I remember noticing that detail. The smell of it, sharp and chemical, the kind that clings to you no matter how many times you scrub. I'd changed out of my gear in the truck on the way over, borrowed a clean shirt from one of the guys, done what I could with my hair in the rear-view mirror of a fire department vehicle parked outside St. Andrew's United in Barrie. I was 27 minutes late. My hands were still shaking. What I didn't know, what nobody thought to call and tell me, was that the ceremony had already started. I want to go back further, though, because I think that's the only way any of this may make sense. You can't understand the ending without knowing what was there at the beginning, and what I thought was there, and how completely wrong I turned out to be. My name is Vivienne, and I've been a firefighter with Barrie Fire and Emergency Services for 6 years. I started at 24, which made me one of the younger women on the crew, and I worked harder than I've ever worked at anything in my life to earn my place there. People assume firefighting is a young person's game, but the truth is, it takes years before you stop second-guessing yourself in a burning room, before the instinct kicks in properly and your body just knows where to go. By the time I was 26, I had that. By 27, I was the person the newer recruits looked to when things got complicated. I loved my job. I still do. But loving your job the way I love mine comes with a cost, and I learned that the hard way. His name was Patrick. No, wait. I need to tell you about Garrett first, because Garrett was there before Patrick, and you can't understand what made Patrick so appealing unless you understand how lonely the years before him had been. Garrett and I grew up 3 streets apart in Innisfil. We dated all through high school and 2 years into college. He was the kind of easy that you mistake for love when you're young. Familiar, comfortable, someone who already knew your parents and remembered your childhood dog's name. When we broke up at 22, it wasn't dramatic. We just ran out of things to say. He moved to Calgary for a job in oil and gas, and I stayed, and neither of us cried very hard about it. After that, I threw myself into training. 12-hour shifts, weekend certifications, technical rescue courses in Sudbury. My bunkmates became my closest friends. I told myself I didn't have time for anything else, and mostly that was true, and mostly I was okay with it. Then I met Miles Beaumont at a Canada Day party in 2021. A mutual friend's backyard on Lake Simcoe, paper plates of potato salad. Someone had put a Bluetooth speaker on the dock. Miles was standing by the cooler, looking slightly too formal for the occasion. Nice shirt, dark jeans, the kind of shoes you'd wear to a casual dinner rather than a backyard barbecue. Later he told me he'd come straight from showing a house. He worked in real estate, mostly residential. And he was good at it in that particular way, where confidence and charms sit so close together. You can't always tell which one you're responding to. I noticed him because he laughed at something someone said, and then immediately looked a little embarrassed about how loudly he'd laughed. That small flash of self-consciousness, that's what got me. It made him seem real. We talked for 3 hours that night. He drove me home. We texted every day for the week after, and by the following weekend, we were having dinner at a restaurant on Dunlop Street that I'd walked past 100 times and never gone into. On our second date, he told me he'd looked up the Barrie Fire Department because he wanted to understand what my schedule was actually like. He said he didn't want to be the kind of person who made me feel guilty for working nights. I thought, this is what a grown-up relationship feels like. My best friend Tamsin worked at the health unit downtown. She and I had been close since my second year at Georgian College. The kind of close where you don't need to explain yourself, where the other person just picks up the thread wherever you left off. Tamsin had introduced me to Miles indirectly. She knew the mutual friend whose backyard it was, and she loved Miles on my behalf from the very beginning. She and Miles got along in that easy siblings meeting for the first time way that made me think I had somehow assembled exactly the right pieces of a life. The three of us spent a lot of time together. That felt normal. That felt good. Miles and I had been together a year and a half before I noticed anything. And when I did notice it, the way Tamsin touched Miles's arm when she laughed, the way he held eye contact with her a beat too long sometimes. I told myself I was being paranoid. Tamsin was loyal. Miles was honest. I had simply been burned by too many cautionary tales at the fire hall about people who'd cheated, and I was projecting. Miles proposed on a Thursday night in November. We were in my apartment, nothing special about the evening. Takeout from the Thai place on Essa Road, a show we'd been watching, the kind of ordinary weeknight that doesn't announce itself. He got up to get a glass of water and came back with a ring. He said he'd been carrying it in his coat pocket for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment, and that he'd finally realized there wasn't going to be a right moment. There was just going to be a normal night, and that was actually better. The ring was a simple solitaire. I know he went to a jeweler in Collingwood, a small independent place his aunt had recommended. That detail mattered to me. I said yes. Tamsin cried when I called her. We planned a small wedding, courthouse ceremony at the Barrie City Hall, a dinner at a restaurant afterward for close family and a handful of friends. We were not people who wanted the big production. At least, I wasn't. Miles went along with whatever I suggested, which I took to be flexibility and which I now understand was indifference to the outcome. The date was set for a Saturday in July. I was off shift that morning. I'd arranged everything with my captain weeks in advance. I got up early, did my hair with more care than I'd given it in possibly years, wore a white dress I'd bought at a boutique in Toronto on a trip with my mother. My mum, Elaine, had driven up from Oakville the night before and was staying in my spare room. We had coffee together that morning. She told me I looked beautiful, and I believed her. The ceremony was scheduled for 11. At 9:17, my phone rang. It was dispatch. There was a fire in a residential building on Ann Street North. An apartment fire, 3-alarm, reports of a child trapped on the 4th floor. The crew was already on scene. They needed everyone they could get. You might wonder why they called me on my wedding day. The honest answer is that I'd told my captain I could be reached if something catastrophic happened. And this qualified. 3 alarms in a residential building on a Saturday morning means people are home. It means kids are home. It means the calculus is different. I stood in my kitchen in my white dress and thought for approximately 4 seconds. Then I went to my room, changed, kissed my mom on the cheek, told her to go to City Hall and tell Miles I'd be there as soon as I could, and drove to the station. I tried to call Miles on the way. His phone rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I left a message. I texted. I told him there was a fire. A child was involved. I was responding. I would get there as fast as I humanly could. Please don't start without me. My mum told me later that she relayed the message. She walked into City Hall at 5 minutes to 11, found Miles and Tamsin and my Aunt Carol, and Miles's parents standing in the lobby, and told him exactly what I'd told her to say. Miles nodded. That was his entire response. He nodded. The fire on Ann Street took 2 hours and 40 minutes. We got the little boy, 6 years old. His name was Mateo. Out through the window of 4C using an aerial ladder. He had smoke inhalation and a cut on his forehead from the window frame, and when I got him down to the paramedics he was crying, which was the best possible sign. Crying means breathing. I will never forget the sound of it. We contained the fire to 2 units. Nobody else was seriously hurt. By the time we got back to the hall for equipment check and I'd showered and changed into the spare clothes I kept in my locker, the white dress was not coming back. It was 11:58. I called Miles again. No answer. I texted, on my way, Please wait for me. I'm so sorry." My mum wasn't answering either, which I found strange but told myself maybe her ringer was off. I drove to City Hall. I parked on Mulcaster Street and half ran to the entrance, still pulling my jacket on, hair still damp. The receptionist in the lobby gave me a look that I couldn't quite read. The room where civil ceremonies were performed was on the second floor. I took the stairs. I heard them before I saw them. A murmur of voices, the scrape of chairs. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. Miles was standing at the front of the room with an officiant. He was wearing the blue suit we'd picked together at a shop on Bayfield Street. He was holding hands with someone in a white dress. It was Tamsin. I know there are moments in life where the world actually stops, and people say that as a figure of speech, but I mean it literally. My brain just halted, refused to process. I stood in the doorway of a government ceremony room in a borrowed crew shirt, still smelling faintly of smoke. And I watched my fiancé and my best friend turn to look at me. What I remember most clearly is Tamsin's face. She didn't look guilty. She looked almost relieved, like something that had been very tense for a long time had finally been resolved. Miles's mother, Sandra Beaumont, a woman from Mississauga who had always been perfectly pleasant to me in a way that now seemed like performance, stepped forward from the first row of chairs. "Vivienne," she said, not unkindly, just stated, like she was naming an object that had turned up somewhere it didn't belong. My mum was in the second row, rigid, her face doing something I'd never seen it do. She started to stand. My Aunt Carol put a hand on her arm. "You're too late," Sandra said, and then, "I want to be precise about this." She gestured, very slightly, toward the door, as if I were a delivery that had arrived at the wrong address. I don't know what I expected. Some version of anguish, maybe. Some acknowledgement. He looked at the floor. Tamsin said, "Viv," and I turned around and walked out. I don't remember the stairs. I remember the lobby, the receptionist's expression making more sense now, the automatic door, the heat of July on the sidewalk. I remember sitting on a bench on the south side of Mulcaster Street and staring at the parking lot for what might have been 10 minutes or 40. My mum found me there. She sat down beside me and didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "I want you to know that I stood up when she walked in. I want you to know that I walked out." I looked at her. "I just need you to know that," she said. I nodded. There's a particular kind of grief that doesn't feel like grief at first. It feels like being very far away from yourself, like looking at your own life through a window. That's what the next few weeks felt like. I went back to work because work was the one place where I knew exactly what I was supposed to do and exactly who I was while doing it. My bunkmates knew something had happened. I told them the bare minimum. Most of them were tactful about it. One of them, a guy named Terry who's been on the crew for 22 years and has seen absolutely everything, said, "You saved a kid's life that morning." He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. My mum stayed for a week. She cleaned my apartment with the focused energy of a woman who needed something to do with her feelings. My Aunt Carol called every other day. I stopped looking at my phone as much, which helped. Miles had moved most of his things out of our shared life. We'd never actually lived together, which in retrospect I understand was deliberate on his part, within a week. He texted once to say he was sorry, that it wasn't supposed to happen this way, that he hoped I could understand someday. I read it several times and then didn't respond. I'm still not entirely sure what he meant by the way it was supposed to happen, which I think is probably a question I don't actually want answered. Tamsin called twice. I didn't pick up. She sent a card. A card, in the mail, handwritten. And I sat with it for a long time before I put it in the recycling. I don't know what I expected from it. Not that. Whatever it was, about 6 weeks after the wedding. That wasn't. I got a call from a woman named Louise Farrell. She identified herself as a real estate compliance officer with the Real Estate Council of Ontario. She asked if I had a few minutes to speak with her about a matter involving Miles Beaumont. I sat down, she explained. In the careful, measured tone of someone who does this regularly, that her office had received a complaint related to a property transaction in which Miles had been the listing agent. The complaint alleged that Miles had misrepresented the conditions of a property to a buyer, had concealed a known structural deficiency, and had collected a referral kickback that was not disclosed to either party. The investigation was in early stages, but as part of standard procedure, they were speaking with people who had had a close personal relationship with the subject in the relevant time period. "Did you ever discuss his real estate business with him?" she asked. "Specific transactions, clients, anything of that nature?" I thought about it. I actually had. Miles had a habit of talking through his day at dinner, and I'd absorbed more than I realized: names, neighborhoods, deals he was proud of, deals that frustrated him. One property in Alcona had come up several times. He'd been very eager about it. He'd mentioned the buyer was relocating from Vancouver, wouldn't be able to do a full in-person inspection, was relying heavily on the disclosure documents. I told Louise Farrell everything I could remember. She thanked me, asked if she could follow up if needed, and we ended the call. I sat in my kitchen for a long time afterward. I thought about Miles's confidence, the way it had always felt warm and reassuring to me. I thought about how well he read a room, how easily he made people feel like they were in good hands. I thought about the buyer in Alcona who'd relied on documents that may have been falsified, who was now living in a house with a structural deficiency they hadn't known to ask about. I thought about what else I might have missed. The investigation took several months. I was called to provide a formal statement in October, which I did. I'm not a lawyer, and I can't tell you exactly what happened in every step of the process, but what I can tell you is this. In February of the following year, Miles Beaumont's real estate license was suspended pending a formal hearing. The RICO complaint process is a matter of public record. You can look it up. The buyer in Alcona reached a settlement. I don't know the terms. What I do know is that I wasn't named in any of it. I hadn't co-signed anything, hadn't been added to any accounts, hadn't tied myself to him financially in any way. We'd talked vaguely about a joint account after the wedding. We hadn't gotten there yet. I think about that a lot. When his license was suspended, a mutual acquaintance, someone we both knew from that Lake Simcoe party where we met, texted me. She said, "I heard about Miles. Are you doing okay?" I told her I was. She said, "I always thought there was something a bit off about him. I'm sorry I never said anything." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just said, "Me too, but it's okay." What I actually felt was more complicated than that, and it took me a long time to untangle it. Part of me was angry, at Miles, obviously, but also at myself for all the moments I'd dismissed as paranoia. The too long eye contact, the times his phone faced down on the table, the night he said he'd been working late and I'd called his office line on a whim and nobody picked up, and he'd had a perfectly good explanation that I'd accepted because I'd wanted to. Part of me was grateful, not in a simple way. Grateful the way you're grateful when you realize you drove through an intersection just before something went wrong. Not because anything good happened, just because you weren't there when it did. And part of me, honestly, was embarrassed. I know that's not the popular emotion to admit, but I'd introduced Miles to my mother, to my colleagues, to my Aunt Carol, who'd driven from Windsor for a ceremony that didn't happen. I'd let myself be seen wanting something with him, and that visibility felt costly in a way that took a while to process. The person who helped me most with that was actually someone I'd known for years and underestimated. My crewmate, A woman named Deb, who'd been with Barrie Fire for 11 years and who I'd always respected without particularly seeking out as a confidant. One afternoon in the hall kitchen, she asked me, very directly, how I was actually doing. Not in a social way. In a way that meant she actually wanted to know. I told her more than I planned to. Deb listened. She poured me coffee. Then she said, "You know what I've noticed about you, Vivienne? You save people for a living, and you're very good at it. But you've never figured out how to let anyone do anything for you." I didn't know what to say. "That's not a criticism," she said. "It's just maybe something to think about." I thought about it. I'm still thinking about it, honestly. The legal process around Miles's license ran into the spring. I gave my statement. I answered the follow-up questions. Louise Farrell had. I went to work and did my job, and slowly, in the way that time does when you let it, the sharp edges of everything started to dull. Tamsin moved to Ottawa. I found that out through someone else, which felt about right. I don't have any particular feeling about it anymore. There's a specific moment. You can't plan for it. You can't rush it, where someone you've lost just becomes part of your history instead of part of your present, and they stop carrying any charge. That happened with Tamsin sometime around March. I noticed it the way you notice the absence of a noise you'd stopped hearing anyway. My mum came up for my birthday in April. We had dinner at a place on Dunlop Street. Not the same one, a different one. And she told me about a program she'd signed up for, volunteering with literacy tutoring at the Oakville Library. She seemed happy about it. We talked about her garden and my next certification course, and whether I wanted to visit my Aunt Carol in Windsor for the long weekend. Ordinary things. The good kind of ordinary. The kind you don't fully appreciate until you've lived through a stretch of time where ordinary wasn't available. At the end of dinner, she said, without any particular preamble, "I've been thinking about that morning, when you called to say you were going to the fire." I waited. I think I didn't say this enough at the time, because everything was so chaotic afterward, but I want to say it now. She looked at me across the table. "I was proud of you. I am proud of you. What you did that morning was exactly who you are, and any person worth anything would have waited." I didn't cry. I'd done most of my crying by then in the kind of solitary, undignified sessions that happen in the shower at 2 in the morning. But something in me settled, hearing that. Something that had been waiting to be said. The little boy, Mateo. I heard from his family once, a few months after the fire. His mum sent a card to the station, addressed to the crew, generally, thanking us. My captain read it out in the morning meeting. Someone had drawn inside the envelope in purple crayon, which I'm told was Mateo's contribution. A fire truck with a very optimistic number of wheels. I keep it in my locker. I don't think about Miles much anymore. When I do, it's usually something small that triggers it. A restaurant he mentioned once, a neighborhood name in the news. The feeling that comes with it isn't grief, exactly, and it isn't anger. It's more like the thing you feel when you've narrowly missed something on the highway. A flat tire, a patch of ice. And you've got enough distance now to understand how easily it could have gone the other way. I got into this relationship because I was lonely and he was charming, and those two things lined up at the right moment. I stayed in it because I confused familiarity with safety. I missed the signs because I wanted to miss them, and because I'd spent so long being self-sufficient that I'd lost the habit of trusting my own discomfort. These are not comfortable things to know about yourself, but they're useful. Last September, I started seeing someone. His name is Ben. He teaches high school history in Barrie. He coaches the junior volleyball team and takes it far too seriously in a way that I find completely charming. We met at a farmer's market on a Saturday morning when I accidentally picked up his bag of peaches. He's patient, and he's steady, and he laughs at himself easily. which I've decided is the thing I should have been looking for all along. I told him about Miles on our 4th date. Not the whole story, just enough. He listened carefully. He asked one question, "Are you okay now?" And when I said yes, mostly, he said, "Good. I'm glad you told me." That was it. That was the whole conversation. We're not in a hurry. We don't need to be. I'm 31 now, and I know what I want, and I know, better than I used to, what I don't. I know that someone worth trusting shows up when things are hard, not just when they're easy. I know that love shouldn't require you to look the other way on anything. I know that a person who nods when you tell him you're running into a burning building, not because he's calm, but because he doesn't actually care about the outcome, is telling you something about himself that you owe it to yourself to hear. I heard it, eventually. I just needed time to understand what I was listening to. And I still smell smoke sometimes, in the back of my gear, in the walls of the hall after a big call. It's different from what I used to think it was. It used to feel like proof of something I'd sacrificed. Now it just smells like work, like purpose, like the thing I get up in the morning to do. That's enough. Honestly, for the first time in a while, it's more than enough.